In this video, I'll be sharing my top picks for the best smartwatches and health trackers based on actual data. And we'll be discussing a range of different brands and models, including Garmin, Polar, Oura Ring, Whoop, Huawei, Fitbit, and Xiaomi. So whether you're a fitness enthusiast, a health-conscious individual, or just someone who wants to track your steps and basic health trends, I've got you covered. I've based my recommendations on systematic and scientific measurements I've taken over the last few years, since I believe that all my recommendations should be backed up by a lot of data. So sit back and let's see if we can find the perfect smartwatch or health tracker for you. Hello everyone. For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now, I've tested more than 80 smartwatches over the last 2.5 years, and I've always tried to share the performance of these watches based on unbiased data and systematic analyses. However, one thing that admittedly lacks in my reviews is a consideration of each person's individual needs, which might make certain aspects of a smartwatch more or less relevant. So in this video, I'd therefore like to share my recommendations taking into account the different real-world use cases you might have, but of course still basing my recommendations on all the data I collected. And I want to start off by looking at the best devices for general health tracking. And with that I mean the devices that check your activity levels, your sleep quality and other health metrics like body temperature, resting heart rate and heart rate variability. And these devices then use all of these data to advise and inform you on your day-to-day health. Now there are many smartwatches and wearables that do this to some degree, but for me there are two top contenders in this category, the Oura Ring and the Whoop strap. Now the Whoop strap is a health tracker that you can wear on many parts of your body, but most people choose to wear it on either their wrist or their biceps. And the Oura Ring, on the other hand, is a ring, as the name suggests, in this case a smart ring with many types of sensors. Both of these were designed to be worn all day and can track your heart rate during workouts, but also do detailed sleep analysis and check your daily activities. Now, based on all these data, they then try to detect changes in your health parameters that could indicate, for instance, you did not recover well enough, or on the other hand, it might actually indicate that it's a good day to do vigorous exercise. They can potentially also be used to detect when you're ill and help guide your recovery. So let's take a look at some data that show what the strengths and weaknesses of these two devices are. Now, one thing both devices can actually do quite well is see if there's any changes compared to your normal baseline, which might indicate something is different from your normal health status. But this can be due to something relatively minor, like poor sleep quality, for instance, a late meal or alcohol, or due to something more severe, like a viral infection. And the plot here relates to the more extreme case of being ill. On the horizontal axis is the temperature deviation measured by the Oura Ring in degrees Celsius, and on the vertical axis is my subjective score of feeling sick, which I filled out without first looking at the Oura Ring data. Now, to explain, the Oura does not measure my absolute temperature, but a relative temperature, so a deviation from my baseline. And as you can see, there was a clear correlation between the temperature measured by the Oura Ring and how sick I was feeling. Now, all 3 days where I was feeling most sick with a score of 4, the Oura Ring detected an increased temperature between 0.5 and 1 degrees Celsius. So this is a first indication that an objective measurement and subjective feeling correlated. Now, interestingly, for about 2.5 years, I also took blood samples every 3 weeks or so. And each time I measured the total number of white blood cells in my blood, which is displayed on the bottom plot right here. So on this vertical axis, we have the number of white blood cells. Now, generally, when you get infected with a virus, for instance, you expect the body to respond by increasing your white blood cell count. Now, the white blood cells are basically the soldiers in your army that fight the infection. And as you can see, I had a number of measurements that deviated significantly from the general trend. And I highlighted a couple of them with red vertical lines. Interestingly, as you can see, 3 times when I had a period of feeling sick, there were significant deviations from my normal white blood cell counts either during or after. Now we can see one example right here, but also right here and right here. Now for the first 2 times when I had a period of feeling sick, there was an increase in my white blood cell count. But this 3rd time when I felt sick for a bit longer, I actually first had a drop and then a slow increase. Now, the reason I'm showing you this data is, first of all, I think it's just really cool. But the second is that my subjective scores of feeling sick were actually associated in different ways with a physical response of my body's immune system. And in the end, the Oura Ring was also associated with this score of feeling sick. Now, I should mention that the tests that I just showed you were actually done with the previous generation of Oura Ring, the Oura Ring 2, and the newer generation, generation 3, has even more temperature sensors. So hopefully generation 3 performs at least as well or better. Now, at the moment, the Oura Ring, in my opinion, provides some of the best and most intuitive health tracking compared to almost all devices I've tested. Now, of course, a viral infection is an extreme case, but in addition to this extreme case of having an infection leading to an increased body temperature, it also shows you quite well how things like your resting heart rate variability, and respiratory rate change due to, for instance, overtraining, alcohol usage, or even something as small as a late meal. Now, this can help you track your general health and help you decide when to go hard and when to take a rest. And we can actually check the accuracy of the Oura Ring by comparing it to an ECG chest strap, which is very accurate at measuring my heart rate. And here you can see an example night of my heart rate tracked by both the Oura Ring 3 in red and an ECG chest strap in blue-green. As you can see, the Oura Ring showed roughly the same values as the chest strap, so there's generally a nice agreement between both of the devices. And we can see the same thing for this second example night, where the Oura Ring nicely follows along, except for this missing one spike in my heart rate right here. But overall, it's not looking too bad. I think I actually got up out of bed for a moment, so my heart rate increased and the Oura Ring did not detect this. But during the night, while I was trying to sleep or I was actually asleep, the heart rate was tracked quite well by the Oura Ring. And we can actually quantify this by calculating the correlation of the heart rate as measured by the Oura Ring with that of the ECG chest strap. So we have those results for the Oura Ring 3 on the left and the Oura Ring 2 on the right. So the heart rate as measured by the Oura Ring is on the vertical axis and the heart rate measured by the ECG chest strap on the horizontal axis. And as you can see, there's generally a pretty good agreement as most points are along the blue line and the blue line indicates perfect correlation. There are some missing data points, which are the ones on the bottom right here, but overall the correlation is pretty good, both for the older and the newer generation. And we generally see something similar for heart rate variability, though I would say this is slightly less accurate. So this is a similar plot to before, but now for heart rate variability, with the Oura Ring 3 in red and the ECG chest strap in blue. Again, the overall patterns over the night match nicely between both devices. So if the Oura Ring measured a high or low heart rate variability, the ECG chest strap generally measured more or less the same thing. And we see something similar for this second example night for heart rate variability, though the deviations are slightly bigger in this case. Still, this should be good enough for general health tracking and for keeping an eye on the nights when something is off with your health. However, where the Oura Ring lacks a bit is in sports tracking, which is where the Whoop strap might be a better choice for some people. Now, as I showed you in a recent video, the Whoop strap 4.0 seemed to perform similarly to the Oura Ring 3 when it came to detecting and tracking my COVID-19 infection. And I've generally found the Whoop strap to perform quite well when it comes to general health tracking and also to the reporting of that clearly in the app. I do still feel that the Oura Ring has a slight edge over the Whoop strap when it comes to presenting the data clearly in the app. However, for me, the Whoop strap is much more convenient for tracking my heart rate during workouts. So that's a balance you have to think of. The Oura Ring 3 can track your heart rate during a workout, but I find the ring generally less comfortable to wear during sports, and when I tested it in the past, it had quite some missing data. Additionally, the general accuracy of the Oura Ring 3 has not always been great for heart rate during activities. Now the Whoop strap 4.0 actually does better in this regard. In this plot right here, you can see an overview of the performance of many devices for tracking my heart rate while cycling indoors. This is actually one of the easiest types of exercises for a smartwatch to track my heart rate. I compared the heart rate of all of these devices against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. We will use the agreement with the ECG chest strap as the metric to check the accuracy of all these devices, which is displayed along the horizontal axis right here. We want that value, in this case the correlation, to be as close to 1 as possible. On the vertical axis, I ordered the watches from worst to best, so the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. And here I marked the Whoop strap 4.0 in red and 2 Oura rings worn on different fingers in purple. As you can see, the Whoop strap performs significantly better than the Oura rings, since its correlation is significantly higher, which we can actually see even better when we zoom in to just the watches with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. Now, for this relatively easy type of exercise to track, we see that the Whoop strap is somewhere in the upper middle class of watches, whereas the Oura rings are doing significantly worse. Still, for this exercise, I would say that the Oura Rings are not doing that bad, but for other exercises, they're sometimes doing worse. And the main issue I had so far is that they also tend to have a lot of missing data. Now, for workout heart rate, the Whoop strap definitely performs better than the Oura Ring. But on the other hand, there's also definitely better devices than the Whoop strap for specifically heart rate tracking during workouts, and I'll get to those later. But just briefly right here, you can see that some Huawei watches and especially Apple watches are doing a lot better than the Whoop strap. So if you're specifically interested in heart rate tracking during workouts, I'll get to that in another part of the video. And in that case, the Whoop strap and Oura Ring are probably not your best choice. In that case, you should really go for instance, an Apple watch or a Huawei watch. But as I said, I'll discuss more on that later. Now, if you do end up wanting to buy a smartwatch or health tracker, I'll add an affiliate link to the Whoop strap, a discount link to the Oura Ring, and a general Amazon link for almost any other device in the description below. If you use those links, it doesn't cost you any more, some even give a discount, and at the same time you're supporting the channel. And that actually provides a nice segue to the next topic I want to discuss, the best watches for sports tracking. But before I do that, I want to mention one honorable mention when it comes to health tracking, and that is Fitbit. Now, Fitbit produces many different watches, but all of them generally at least have similar performance for heart rate and sleep tracking, and their app also provides insights into your health metrics and potential deviations from your baseline. Now, in my experience, the Fitbit app does still feel a bit less developed than the Oura and Whoop apps though. Now, the benefit of Fitbit is that you can pick up a Fitbit for much less money than the Whoop strap or the Oura Ring, with for instance the new Fitbit Inspire 3 only selling you back about $100. However, you do need to get a monthly Fitbit subscription to get access to all of the metrics and trends that Fitbit provides. And this is actually a general issue I have with many of these health tracking devices. And for Whoop and Oura it's even worse, where you basically cannot use the device at all without getting that subscription. So keep that in mind if you plan to get any of these devices. But let's now move on to what I think are the best watches for sports tracking, with one important part of sports tracking being heart rate tracking. Now, I've discussed it in many of my videos already, and here I just want to share the most important results. So let's summarize, which are the best heart rate trackers out there? Now, I already showed you some results for heart rate tracking while spinning, but what about heart rate tracking while cycling outside? This is actually much more difficult for most watches because of the increased movement and also the increased tension on my arm. So let's take a look at some data. An overview of the performance of about 50 different smartwatches and health trackers is displayed right here. Again, we will use the correlation with the ECG chest strap as the metric on the horizontal axis, and the higher this value, the better. On the vertical axis, I also again ordered the watches from worst to best. So overall, the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its agreement with the ECG chest strap. Similar to what we saw for cycling indoors, the best devices are Apple watches and some Huawei watches. If you purely care about heart rate tracking during exercise, these are really the best devices out there. The Apple Watch generally still has a slight edge over Huawei watches when it comes to heart rate tracking accuracy, but both are pretty good. Now, I would say that the downside of the Apple Watch is that it only works with iPhones and that the battery life is really limited. You really need to charge it every day. Now, the battery life on Huawei watches is much better, but the downside of Huawei on the other hand is that they're facing some sanctions in the US, limiting their access to Google apps and services. This can make it cumbersome to use some of the functionalities. Now, if you don't want to go with either of these two options, some Garmin devices are actually quite okay heart rate trackers as well. Some of my favorites include the Garmin Forerunner 255 and the Garmin Instinct 2, which are decent heart rate trackers in my experience. They are pretty good for things like cycling indoors and outdoors, though definitely not good enough for weightlifting. Now, the results for about 60 devices for weightlifting are displayed right here. And as you can see, again, the best devices here are different Apple watches and also some Huawei watches. But let's zoom in to take an even better look at some of the best devices. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. As you can see, some other watches come close to Apple and Huawei, like the Pixel watch and some older generation Huawei watches. However, honestly, I would only use watches with a correlation of around 0.95 or higher for weightlifting, so that is really limited to this small group of Apple watches and Huawei watches right here. And if you really want the best and most consistent results, just get an ECG chest strap, like for instance the Polar H10, to track your heart rate while weightlifting. And that is actually my general recommendation if your most important goal is to track your heart rate during exercise. The best strategy for getting accurate heart rate tracking under most circumstances is using an ECG chest strap. However, for many people who are tracking their workouts, GPS or location tracking is potentially just as important since they want to keep track of their bike rides and their runs. So let's take a look at those results. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. And of course, you would also make me really happy and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But of course, this is totally up to you. Now, enough self-promotion. Let's get back to the GPS tracking performance. And in my experience at least, Garmin devices are some of the best watches for this purpose. And here you can see, for instance, the results for tracking my location with the Garmin Forerunner 255. Now, to test the GPS accuracy, I cycled the same route multiple times and I want to see how well the signals overlap. Now, in total, I cycled the same route 5 times here, and the green markers indicate the moment that the watch acquired the signal. And as you can see, the Forerunner 255 generally got the signal quite quickly, and most markers are in the same location. One time it took about 1 block of cycling before it got the signal, and once it lost the signal for a while, but overall this is looking quite good. And if we look at the general signal quality, the lines overlap quite well. And we basically see the same thing for most of the ride, where the lines overlap very well. Especially here, the signals overlap super well, and Garmin is very consistent in its GPS tracking. Also, if we zoom in at some moment where it turns some corners, you can see that the signals are very consistent and therefore likely very accurate. And we see more or less the same thing cycling back. Once it took a bit of time to acquire the signal, but generally the signals overlap very well. There are some moments with a tiny bit of deviation, as you can see right here, for instance, but also right here. But overall, it's doing really well. It performs about as well as can be expected. And out of all the brands I've tested, Garmin has some of the best GPS tracking out there. Now here I use the Garmin Forerunner 255 as an example, but Garmin generally tends to perform very well when it comes to GPS or location tracking. Now, in addition to Garmin, I've also had reasonably good experience with the Apple Watch when it comes to GPS tracking. So let's take a look at how the Apple Watch 8 and the much more expensive Apple Watch Ultra performed for GPS tracking. Now let's start by looking at the Apple Watch Series 8, and here you can see again 5 times I cycled to work with the Apple Watch. The green markers in this case are super close together, meaning that all 5 times the Apple Watch got the GPS signal almost immediately and very accurately. Now the consistency between the different signals is okay, though not great. As we can see, especially here in the beginning, there's a bit more deviation between the signals. However, I have to say that later on the signal quality got a lot better and the signals are a lot closer together. Now, if we look at the same location as before where I took 2 turns, the signals are a bit more smoothed out, so a bit rounder than before. So here the Garmin Forerunner 255 looked a bit better, but overall the Apple Watch is not bad. And if we look a bit further down my rides, we can see that the consistency is generally quite okay, though there are some moments with a bit more deviation. But how about the Apple Watch Ultra? How does that compare to the Apple Watch Series 8? Supposedly at least it should perform better given its dual frequency GPS, but let's have a look. And again, here we can see 5 times I cycled to work, but now with the Apple Watch Ultra. And also in this case, the green markers are very close together, meaning that the signal was acquired quickly and accurately, so that looks good. And also for the Apple Watch, in the beginning, we do see a bit more deviation between the signals, which gets better later on. There is definitely some deviation, but overall it doesn't look bad. Generally, the signals are quite close together, but again here where I turned the corner, at least for 4 out of the 5 rides, the signals are a bit more smoothed out. And again here near this area, there's a bit more deviation, especially going through the park right here. Still, overall, the Apple Watch doesn't look too bad. Still, if we take a look at the same segment for the Garmin Forerunner 255 right here, this does look a bit better. Though I would say that both the Apple Watch and the Garmin Forerunner 255 do pretty well, where the Garmin Forerunner 255 has a slight edge over the Apple Watch. Now overall, the Apple Watches performed quite okay for GPS tracking, though the Garmin Forerunner 255 definitely did better. So if you care more about GPS tracking than tracking your heart rate with a watch, Garmin definitely seems to be a better choice than Apple, though Apple is still solid enough in my opinion for many people. So what are my overall conclusions for sports tracking? Well, if you want an all-round decent sports tracker, I would recommend the Garmin device, like for instance the Forerunner 255, which seems to do well enough in most categories. Now, if you really care about heart rate tracking on your wrist, you should go for one of the Apple Watches or Huawei watches I showed in my overview. But keep in mind that the Apple Watch has very limited battery life and can only be used with an iPhone, and that the Huawei watches might have limited access to Google services. Next, let's talk about sleep tracking. Now, this is something I've actually discussed in quite some detail on my channel, and going into all the details requires a separate video. However, in this video, I want to focus on two things. One, which is the best sleep stage tracker, and two, which device do I personally find the most useful and interpretable when it comes to sleep tracking. Now, this actually partially at least overlaps with the first part of this video where I discussed health tracking, though I do think there are some important nuances I did not discuss yet. But let's start off with the best sleep stage trackers. Most modern smartwatches try to measure what sleep stages you went through at each moment of your night. And that tracking is plotted right here for the Apple Watch Ultra on the bottom as an example, and an EEG device called the Dream 2 on top. I chose the Dream 2 as a reference since that can actually measure my brainwaves and has been shown to be relatively reliable at sleep stage tracking. For getting an overall impression of how well the watches perform, the Dream 2 should likely be good enough. However, the gold standard would be polysomnography, which I would also like to try on some of the top performing watches in the future. So in this example plot right here, we have the clock time along the horizontal axis and the different stages on the vertical axis. As you can see, the Apple Watch Ultra generally agreed very well with the EEG headband. If we look at the deep sleep measured by the EEG device, for instance, which is marked here in purple, we see quite a nice overlap. All the deep sleep detected by the EEG headband was also detected by the Apple Watch. That is because, at least in my experience, the Apple Watch is one of the best sleep trackers out there, which we can also see if we mark the EEG recorded REM sleep in red. The Apple Watch again detects most of the REM sleep segments that the EEG device also detected. Only near the end here do we see some disagreement, but overall it agrees pretty well. There are of course also more poorly performing watches, and for sleep tracking one such example is the Huawei Watch Fit 2. The Watch Fit 2 is really a great heart rate tracker, but as you can see right here, the sleep stage tracking is not very good. If we look at REM sleep tracking, for instance, where here in red I mark the REM sleep as recorded by the EEG device, we don't see a big overlap between the EEG device and the Huawei Watch Fit 2 on the bottom right here. In general, for the Huawei Watch Fit 2, as we can also see for this night, I would say you don't really see the expected sleep patterns and the expected sleep cycles in the sleep stages as the Huawei Watch Fit 2 measures them. This is another indication that it's probably not that great at sleep stage tracking. Now, the reason I showed you these examples was to show you that there's actually a great diversity in the quality of sleep stage tracking. But let's now display all of the results I have summarized for 44 different health trackers. And those results are displayed right here. This graph shows an overview of the agreement of different watches with the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the 4 individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. So the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. As you can see, the best watches for sleep stage tracking at the moment are different Apple Watches, which likely all use the exact same algorithm. Here I tested the Apple Watch SE, Apple Watch Ultra, Apple Watch Series 7 and Series 8. However, even though they're great sleep stage trackers, Apple Watch have 3 main downsides in this regard. First of all, the battery life of Apple Watches is limited, meaning you need to find time each day to charge them. Second, at the moment, Apple Watches cannot track your naps, so they will only track your sleep in a specific indicated window. And third, you need an iPhone to use them, so you cannot use them on Android. Now, if none of these things is an issue for you, I would definitely recommend an Apple Watch for sleep stage tracking, but you do need to be aware of it. So if you're an Android user, you just cannot use an Apple Watch. However, luckily there are other watches that come close to the performance of Apple Watches when it comes to sleep stage tracking. In these cases, there are different Fitbit devices and also the Google Pixel Watch, which likely uses the same algorithm since Google owns Fitbit, but also the Whoop strap and the Withings Sleep Analyzer. So all these devices did a pretty good job. So if you can't get an Apple Watch or you just don't want to get one, I would recommend any of these devices for sleep stage tracking. Finally, if you're specifically interested in sleep stage tracking, there are some brands I would avoid. Where Huawei, for instance, performed really well when it comes to heart rate tracking, I would not rely on their sleep stage tracking. The same goes for many Garmin watches. Garmin is great at GPS and Garmin watches are generally very good all round, but their sleep stage tracking is not their strongest feature. Now, so far, I've talked quite a bit about sleep stage tracking, but this is honestly just one aspect of general sleep tracking. The tracked sleep stages are interesting to look at just to get a feel for your sleep patterns, and in addition to that, the changes in the ratio of the different sleep stages and also the amount of awake time can be quite informative about the quality of your sleep. However, there's more to sleep tracking than just sleep stage tracking. Some watches and health trackers also provide information on other parameters during your sleep, like for instance your resting heart rate variability, oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, and body temperature. And those things also tell you quite a bit about your sleep quality. And of course, all this information then needs to be packaged and presented in a way to the user that is understandable, usable, and actionable. And not taking into account the sleep stage tracking, in my experience at least, the Oura Ring has given me the best data and the most understandable results so far. There have been examples of nights, for instance, where I had a late meal, which affected my heart rate patterns during the night, and the Oura Ring actually picked up on this, and it told me in the morning it thought I had a late meal and that I might want to skip that next time. To me, initially, this was actually quite surprising that tech had developed to the point where it could make these kinds of predictions. Additionally, in my COVID-19 recovery, which I'm actually at the end of now, it clearly indicated my resting heart rate stayed high for a few nights, even after testing negative. So when it comes to general sleep tracking, so not sleep stage tracking, but tracking your sleep in general and health advice regarding sleep, the Oura Ring is currently my recommended device. The device that comes in at a close second for me in this category is the Whoop strap. Though again, both Oura and Whoop do require you to pay a monthly fee, which is something I'm not a fan of personally. Now, before I get to my final conclusions and recommendations, I do have to mention some limitations in my testing. So first of all, my tests were just done on me, and I'm a Caucasian male that is still relatively young and fit, so some of these results might not translate to you in your specific situation. Second, I did not test all devices out there. I've tested relatively few Polo watches, for instance, though I hope that will change in the future. And third, some of the watches I've tested might by now have updated firmware, so some of the results will change over time and I cannot keep up with all of them. The best example of this is, for instance, the Oura Ring, which by now has an updated sleep stage tracking algorithm that I'm currently still testing, so I don't know how that performs yet. I also didn't do much testing yet of Garmin's body battery, which could actually be an interesting alternative for health tracking if it works well, but I still need to test that. And finally, another limitation of this video is that I didn't discuss any devices that try to actively improve your sleep environment, while at the same time, of course, also tracking your sleep. And a good example of this is the 8 Sleep mattress, but more on that in a later video. But let's now get to my overall conclusions. Which devices would I recommend for you? Well, in general, it really depends, of course, on your goals and your budget, what device is the best fit. So for me personally, I'm interested in both health and sports tracking, and provided money is no object and I just wanted to get one device, I would probably get a Whoop strap. This is a good all-rounder with decent heart rate tracking, good sleep stage tracking, and clear general health advice. However, the costs of this subscription service do add up, since you have to pay a monthly fee. Now, if I allowed myself to get a combination of two devices, I would probably get an Apple Watch Ultra and an Oura Ring. This combines the health tracking of the Oura Ring with the heart rate and sleep stage tracking accuracy of the Apple Watch. And if I was on a bit more of a budget but still had quite some money to spend, I might get an Apple Watch SE instead of the Apple Watch Ultra. Then again, if I had a medium-sized budget, I might actually opt for a Garmin device, like for instance the Forerunner 255 or Instinct 2, both of which are not too expensive and they have quite decent overall tracking. Finally, if I had relatively little money to spend, I would try to find a good deal on an older generation watch. If I cared about okay heart rate tracking, I might get an older generation of the Huawei Watch Fit. Or if I want to be in the Garmin ecosystem, I would search for a good deal on an older generation Garmin watch. Now finally, if I was on a really tight budget, I might search for a good deal on the Huawei Band 6 or 7, or if I wanted to spend even less, a good deal on the Xiaomi Mi Band 6 or 7, but the latter definitely have their issues. I would honestly be a bit more careful interpreting the measurements they take. But before buying anything, if you do care about health tracking, I would recommend checking out these videos on the Oura Ring and Whoop strap right here. On the other hand, if sleep stage tracking and heart rate are important to you, check out these videos on the Apple Watch.